I have the pleasure of announcing the panel from our federal agencies, which there are a lot of long titles here, so bear with me. But moderating, we have Emily Miller from the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship through the U.S. Economic Development Agency in the Department of Commerce. Additionally, we have Brittany Sickler, the Outreach and Partnership Strategist from the Office of Innovation of the U.S. Small Business Administration. We have David Langdon, the Senior Policy Advisor from the Office of the Secretary in the U.S. Department of Commerce. We have Garrett Nilsson, the Technology to Market Program Manager from the U.S. Department of Energy on the Solar Energy Technologies Office. And finally, we have Craig Buerstatte, the Acting Director of the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship in the U.S. Department of Commerce from the Economic Development Administration. So please.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we're excited to be here. And I'm really excited to have these awesome panelists coming to talk to you about the tangible, real-world resources that government is investing in businesses and communities. And we're going to do our best the challenge for this panel will be no acronyms. We'll try to stay away from the alphabet soup that is the federal government. So that's the challenge to all of you. So just to kind of lay the groundwork for kind of where each of these individuals is coming from. So Brittany, with the Small Business Administration, is really investing in businesses of the future. Garrett is really looking at, from Department of Energy, really the industries of the future. Craig obviously is working more in kind of the regional economies, investing in those. And then Dave is really bringing kind of more of a macro workforce trends of the future from the Department of Commerce in the Secretary's office. So to start, one of my favorite things is from Reddit, explain it like I'm 5, ELI 5. So could each of you take just a couple minutes and tell us really what you're doing and break it down for us?
Sure, Emily, I can try, although I have to say I have tried to break this down for even my mother to understand what we work on, and I'm still working on it. But so most people might think of the Small Business Administration as working with just a traditional small business, anyone you might walk out the door here and see. But to differentiate, our group is working with businesses that are developing next generation technologies. So starting out just by saying there's a over $3 billion a year fund with no equity, so non-dilutive, no one's taking control from the company. But for them to be able to use that funding to do proof of concept, research and development, R&D work. And those funds all come from federal agencies that have very large budgets that are doing R&D outside of their agency. The belief is that the small businesses can really capture some of the new things that are going on, as we've heard so far in the conference. Some fascinating people and ideas and a lot of innovation out there. So we'll leverage that, the agencies that really want to either possibly procure and take in some of that technology as it relates to their mission, or it could be that they want to see the country advance in certain technology areas. So for the 5-year-olds, what might be relevant to them, everything from the Department of Education has different games that help with learning. Then you can go on into, obviously, Department of Defense. We can go into energy, agriculture. Kind of every facet of society could somehow be touched by the technologies that these small businesses are building. Now, just a quick caveat, as we mentioned, the government can be an often complex and challenging environment. I also work with a whole host of organizations through a program. We fund them to help entrepreneurs through this process because it's not the kind of thing that I would advertise, the man with the money jacket, the dollar signs. There are some strings attached, and it can be quite a process to apply and be competitive for funding. So all around the country, we have partners that are working with entrepreneurs to help them understand the process. The whole thing, if any of you have not quite guessed what I'm talking about, is the Small Business Innovation Research and Technology Transfer Program. So my one acronym will be SBIR-STTR. So through a grant program, we are helping folks, especially in areas of the country that don't necessarily have all of the institutions around them to make that difference. Earlier, we were bringing up research institutions and other groups, and I know we'll get into that shortly. but try to fill in the gaps and help people, regardless of where they are, be able to get funding that's needed for their innovation, especially since they are at a level that's pre-VC, very high risk.
Awesome. What about you, Garrett?
Yeah, so I work inside of the Department of Energy. So many people know the Department of Energy is one of the largest kind of early stage R&D technology funding research agencies in the US, if not the world. I work specifically in the solar energy department, which is housed inside of energy efficiency and renewable energy portion of the Department of Energy. So we're funded on the order of about $240 million a year to do early stage research at national labs and universities. Then we also think a lot about how do we actually get that technology into the marketplace, which is what my role is as a program manager on the technology to market team. So we work closely with small businesses who have new and impactful ideas. We do this through traditional kind of grant level funding or cooperative agreements, which also involves some level of involvement from us. We also definitely use the SBIR. I'll steal that acronym for now because she's already used it. And then we also have prize programs. And we actually have, between traditional funding and prize programs, we have $13 million available right now for potentially small businesses who are doing stuff in the solar energy space and related space. But as part of thinking about that, we also need to think about the business ecosystem. And so a big part of the business ecosystem today in solar energy is the workforce itself. You know, there's over 250,000 people employed in solar today. That's a 150% increase over 2009. And there really is a need to make sure that each of the emerging markets have the right skill sets and that we can develop training that is hopefully replicable. So the DOE can come in, figure out what might be an effective method of training, and then focus on replicating that across the country. So we think about everything from the technology to the marketplace in which technology operates as well.
That's great.
So Craig Buerstatte with the Office of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the U.S. Department of Commerce, housed within the Economic Development Administration. I know that was already said, but there's a fun exercise we can do here. So in explaining my title, I can explain what we do. We make it maybe we make it intentionally long to send a message perhaps. And within the Commerce, I operate within the Economic Development Administration, and that is because we use innovation and entrepreneurship as a tool to drive economic development so businesses can succeed. Businesses can succeed. That is what Commerce is here to do. So simply put, explaining it like I'm 5, or you're 5, Emily, that is, we invest in communities so they can create the conditions for businesses to succeed. That could mean workforce training investments. That could mean new business accelerators or business incubators. It could be technology commercialization programs, partnering with universities, national labs, or it could be something as simple as revitalizing a piece of infrastructure within the community that's going to bring members into a city center, maybe citizens across a bridge, increasing access. There are so many things that we do along the continuum of economic development, and I'm excited to be here because so many of the strategies and the community-driven efforts discussed the past 2 days, we can get behind because they ultimately lead to jobs. They ultimately lead to economic development. So unlike Brittany, unlike Garrett, who have very specific interests focused on business innovation or industry innovation, Emily and I are focused on community innovation as a tool to create jobs.
Great.
So we've had businesses and entrepreneurs, industries, regions and communities. What are we missing?
Workforce.
Workers. And so that's where I fit in. I'm a senior advisor to Secretary Ross in the Department of Commerce, and I'm his workforce advisor. And I work closely with, well, let's say this administration's focus on workforce policy pretty much from day one. It's a major pillar of their economic growth agenda. And it's been sort of codified through a couple of executive orders that are sort of laying out the need and sort of the path forward for developing a national workforce strategy. And that's where I spend a lot of my time. Working together with colleagues across several cabinet agencies, and of course including the Department of Labor. And the idea is to sort of lay out a general framework for federal policy that will ensure that we have workers that are prepared for today's jobs, because we have great labor shortages today, and for jobs of the future, either jobs that have changed because of technology or just jobs that are changing because of the way workers are changing, right? Adapting to demographics. The major pillars that we have actually been very much validated by everything I've heard just specific to this of central Pennsylvania, this area, over the last few days, around the need for promoting multiple pathways to jobs, around the fact that businesses are heavily invested in their workers, and that we both need to measure that, understand the outcomes of it, and also recognize and celebrate it, because that's a key portion of our education and training infrastructure of the country. Don't have a lot of personally don't oversee any grants, but we do, there's a lot of funding that's driven by this strategy, including the $17 billion of workforce training grants that different agencies give out, and including the sort of the newly reauthorized Perkins bill, so for career and technical education funding for the states, which is looking for a lot stronger business input and a lot of opportunities for that. And also the Higher Education Act, which is the administration, through a group that I'm working on, has laid out some new principles for reauthorized Higher Education Act that would help create much needed flexibility in how we're funding and supporting students through federal financial aid.
That's great, yeah. And I think a good segue here is, you know, we've kind of given a high-level overview, but I think it'd be awesome to come down from more the policy. So I'd ask each of you if you could provide, you know, a great example of, you know, either a business or a project or a community that you've, you know, invested in, or, you know, even the American Workforce Council, Dave, that you could speak to kind of give them an example of how these resources are impacting the communities.
Sure. How much time do we have? I think I could talk about this all day, because I think in our program at least, we're very lucky to have many examples of companies that have built fantastic technologies. Now, as it relates to AI, automation, robotics, those have been topics under many agencies for decades. So really the success pool is very interesting and wide. And the way that different agencies have really worked this into their programs is fascinating. So I'll just give a few examples of agencies, because you might not always tie in some of those opportunities with an agency. You could think, all right, who would be interested in robotics? It could be, you know, the Department of Defense. They want to use robotics in certain situations. Well, as I was looking at topics are what we call the areas where there's availability for funding. The National Cancer Institute had a topic open last fall that was about using AI in some of the medical industry that they're interested in. National Science Foundation has had AI as a whole topic bucket with about 15 subtopics now for years. And so if you go into their portfolio, fantastic. There's a company that is not too far outside of Pittsburgh, NIA Systems. They've been working with several agencies for years, everything from DARPA, Army, Navy, I want to say NASA as well. And one of their latest ones with Army was translating soldier intent into robotic action. So it's kind of this fascinating thing of when you have human language and in a battlefield situation, understanding what that human is trying to say, and then also having the robot take direct orders, using tactical language, mission-directed language. So they were able to propose a topic and then also have great success in doing some of that research and development, and then taking it to a level where it is what we say commercialized. There's a customer, there's someone that's willing to buy that technology and implement it.
Super interesting, yeah.
Yeah, so in terms of some, you know, examples of how we've worked in kind of the robotics and artificial intelligence or machine learning space, you know, we've funded a number of small businesses actually, some through SBIR, that look at how can you take some of the repetitive tasks of solar installation and potentially automate them. So looking at the large utility scale solar fields. And paired with that is also the fact that, you know, these large utility scale fields have millions of solar panels on them. So if you see a decrease in power for a little bit, how do you figure out what the issue is? And so now we're trying to think a lot about how you can use software and stuff like that to be able to make those determinations a little more efficiently. You know, one thing, and I'll take a slightly different twist on this because it's something I haven't heard discussed over the course of the last 2 days, is one of the really successful programs that I think we ran kind of early days in the solar workforce development space was thinking about and engaging with the allied industries as well. So thinking about how does solar impact your local fire department, how they operate, how does it work with real estate agents, how does it work with a wide variety of different groups. And so, you know, one thing I would say is that if people do think they're go into a situation where they might be employing dozens and dozens of robots, and you have batteries and things like that, which are potentially flammable, that shouldn't be a reason not to go down the robotics road, but it should be a reason, an incentive to collaborate with your allied industries so that there aren't those impediments and roadblocks. So you can work with the town, with your greater area to say, look, this is what I want to do. Like, is anything standing in the way of me doing this as based on you, fire chief, or whomever it might be? And so I think when we talk about workforce, it's more than just the person who's going to sit at the desk and do the job. There's a lot of other infrastructure that you need to make sure that you're bringing forward in order to kind of rise the tide for everybody. And so that's kind of one angle I haven't heard that I thought would be a good for this crowd.
So I think it's worth noting that there's a lot of details being discussed, and we do have a breakout session planned after this. So for those of you like, what did they just say? We have an opportunity to dive deeper. So many examples to think about, but one that I love, very relevant for this crowd, in Indiana, they're experiencing a boom in advanced manufacturing. The Economic Development Administration partnered with Ivy Tech Community College to retrofit and expand an ag tech workforce training center of excellence to equip workers to participate in the growing advanced manufacturing economy there. Some of that was taking existing manufacturing workers and just training them on the new advanced manufacturing equipment, and others, workers or participants, were students at the community college itself. And that was a $1.2 million investment, retrofitted a facility, modernized it, expanded it, and we've had exponential impacts by getting thousands of new workers, newly qualified workers, pushed into that advanced manufacturing economy across Indiana. More relevant to some of the innovation, maybe investors or entrepreneurs here, we've done a number of investments, outfitting incubation spaces, labs, business accelerators, and absolutely doing a lot of programming too around those, both inside the business centers, the incubators themselves, but also of note for this region, doing satellite programming or extension programs so rural communities, smaller communities can participate in the innovation and entrepreneurship curricula deployed across the state, a university system, a community college system, and all those programming dollars, the construction costs, the Economic Development Administration can help underwrite a lot of that. Would love to talk more about that in our breakout session.
Right, so some additional critical federal investments are in data on the labor market in particular. And we've seen some really interesting data tools and things to reach youth that provide information on career counseling. But with all the data assets we have, through the big data era and through the federal government, there's some very simple, fundamental questions that people need to answer that we just can't answer easily. Like, what's the payoff of a college education? There's no real single place you can get that kind of information to look at institutions and degree programs and what earnings are over time. We have the college scorecard from the education department, but there's no clear federal strategy. And there's a very interesting new effort at the Census Bureau, which is one of the many agencies that's part of the conglomerate that we call the Department of Commerce, around post-secondary employment outcomes, which is basically, what's the payoff of a college education? And it's an exciting sort of a new pilot research data set that so far has been released for Colorado and for Texas, the University of Texas system, and if we're lucky, it may soon be available for the Penn State system, where people can go in and look by institution and by degree, by your major, what earnings are 1 year after graduation, 5 years, and 10 years, and answer some really simple questions about what the payoff is and what their earnings trajectory is. A lot of times students, you sort of know what you may earn on your first job, but maybe not in the future in that degree program, and also across the wage distribution. So in addition to individual investments, the data, just to make sure it was a level playing field, is a very critical role of the federal government.
Yeah. With just a couple minutes left, maybe each of you could tell the audience maybe a key takeaway or opportunity that you see kind of in your realm of work, and then we can obviously dive into that after this in the breakout sessions.
Sure, so if any of you have been familiar with the funding with SBIR from the past, it's been steadily growing as agencies' budgets have been increasing and their investments in external R&D. So it's really fascinating to see the opportunities that have grown, and so I do want to highlight some of the changes that have been taking place. I won't go through those now, but the agencies are really looking at ways to increase improve their processes. They want to have the best technologies available. I mean, that's what keeps the program so strong. And so at SBA as well, we're working with them kind of across that umbrella, trying to have a better approach between the innovator and the government. And so, like I said before, this is a significant fund. So if any of you are interested in potentially taking your idea and trying to have someone back it, everyone thinks you're crazy. Possibly it could fit under our umbrella. So would love to, if anyone wants to chat about that after, would love to go through that. Also, if you're not on the entrepreneur side, but more of a support organization, the other program that I manage that is funding these groups to help entrepreneurs that are working in high-risk R&D and technology. Please, I would love to hear your thoughts about the innovation entrepreneur ecosystem.
Yeah, for us, we've obviously think a lot about workforce. We actually just announced in the last month, $13 million worth of funding projects that we're kicking off related to workforce. So I'd actually be curious for folks who have looked at replicability of training across different regions. That's something that we're really interested in, so we can hopefully fund stuff once and see it proliferate. With regard to what might be available today, like I mentioned, we have $13 million specifically focused on small business and entrepreneurs available today. We kicked off 2 programs in the last week, a $3 million prize program and $10 million towards kind of entrepreneurs generating new technologies, which would include robotics or AI to help the solar space. That came out on Tuesday as part of a larger $130 million research program. So for those folks out there engaged with universities or labs or just interested in the solar space, there's $130 million available for research across everything from modules on your roof to grid technologies to how do we use mirrors in the desert to make heat and generate electricity as well. So I'm happy to discuss all of that ad nauseum, and I have some handouts as well if people want to take some of that home.
Cool. I think my point is not only relevant for our portfolio, Emily and I's portfolio at EDA, but maybe everyone here on the federal side. And right now, this year, EDA has been authorized for a little over $250 million to deploy to specific economic development projects. On top of that, we have an additional appropriation of $600 million to help support our disaster-stricken communities. That's from the lava flow in Hawaii on through Puerto Rico and the floods and the hurricanes. I think I could talk for hours on that alone, but that's nearly $1 billion that goes toward economic development that we need to deploy. And I hear a lot that we saw you guys invest in this project next door. That's not really what we're doing, and we didn't think it was, so we didn't think you were for us. We didn't think you'd be a fit. Well, the reality is, unlike venture capital and the private sector, we don't go out and scout for projects and say, I like that, we're going to invest. We certainly do business development. That's why we're here. We want to talk about our programs and educate society about what we're here to do. But the reality is we need you to apply. We cannot invest until we have a formal application from the community, and it takes some work. So my ask, maybe, my public service announcement is our projects will only be as good as the programs that participate in them. So if you're doing something exciting in your community, you believe in the impacts it's going to drive across the region, take a look at our programs. We want to be as approachable and collaborative as possible, and government, just like they tell you to go out and vote, hey, I say go out and get involved in the grant programs that are available. Make our resources do more work.
I think I would just add to that it's a dialogue. So if we're here now, you can talk to us here, you can talk to us in a breakout session, but we're also not hard to find in DC, and I think as people apply for grants, that's not just a shot in the dark. There's actually a conversation that takes place throughout the process and is worth taking advantage of to make sure that your applications are as strong as possible.
And Emily, if I can jump in right before you close, we have giant zeros in front of us, but exciting news 2 weeks ago. If any of you think that some of this funding might take a really long time, and maybe I'll look at venture first because the government. 2 weeks ago, Air Force piloted a new pitch day. Companies submitted 5 slides beforehand. They showed up on site, those who made it in. pitched their product. In 15 minutes, they had $75,000 in their account. So half of what a phase one, kind of the initial SBIR investment was already in their bank account for them to be able to do that work. So there is some, there's definitely some good things on the horizon.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Let's give them a warm round of applause, and we look forward to the breakouts.